My name is Patrick Lorne. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a structural inspector for the city of Halifax. It's not the kind of job people ask about at dinner parties. I show up to buildings, I check load-bearing walls, I sign off on permits, and I go home. Most days I eat lunch in my truck. I've been doing this for 6 years, and I've gotten good at being someone the room doesn't notice. I wasn't always like that. Before Meredith, I was different. Easier, maybe. More willing to let people in. Meredith and I dated for 4 years. We had a place together on Gottingen Street, a cat named Biscuit, a routine. I thought we were building something. Then one afternoon, she sat down across from me at our kitchen table and said she'd met someone else, that she'd been unhappy for longer than she could remember, and that she was sorry. She moved out that weekend, took the cat, left the key on the counter. I don't say this to make her the villain, she wasn't. But when something like that ends quietly, with no fight, no real reason you can hold on to, it leaves a kind of hollow that's hard to explain. I went back to work. I filed my permits. I stopped telling people how I was doing. Then Josephine Garrett walked into my office building one Tuesday morning in February. She wasn't there to see me. She was there to file a commercial permit application for a renovation project on Barrington Street. A cafe her frère and fiancé, Sebastian Crown, had been promising to open for 2 years. She'd done all the groundwork. The drawings, the contractor quotes, the zoning correspondence. Sebastian had done the branding. That was more or less how their partnership worked, from what I could tell. I processed her paperwork. She had a question about setback requirements. I couldn't answer off the top of my head, so I pulled the bylaw binder and sat with her for 20 minutes while we worked through it. She was thorough. She caught a potential issue with the mechanical ventilation specs before I even got to it. I told her she was better at this than most of the contractors I dealt with. She laughed and said, "I've learned to be careful. Things have a habit of falling apart if you're not." I didn't know what she meant by that, but I thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. Josephine was 34 and had worked as a project coordinator for a civil engineering firm before she started putting everything into the cafe. She had a quiet way of managing problems, not by making noise, but by thinking 2 steps ahead. She came back to our office 3 more times over the following weeks to follow up on the permit. Each time we talked a little longer than necessary. Once she brought coffee. Not for me specifically, she handed one to the receptionist, one to the other inspector on duty, and one to me, just because she'd been waiting and wanted to do something with her hands. I noticed that. I noticed a lot of things about Josephine Garrett that I didn't say out loud. She had a fiancé. Sebastian Crown was the kind of man who filled a room by walking into it. Tall, confident, the type who shook your hand too firmly and remembered your name because it was useful. I met him once when he came by to pick up Josephine from the office. He waited by the door with his hands in his coat pockets and barely looked at the space around him. When she introduced us, he gave me a glance that said I was not someone he needed to file away. Josephine's permit was approved in late March. She came in to collect the final paperwork and said, "Thank you for being patient with me." I told her the patience was easy on my end. She smiled at that. Then she said, "We've set a date, June 14th. You're welcome to come if you want. It's at St. David's over in Dartmouth." I know it's a bit of a drive. I almost said no. I had no particular reason to go. We weren't friends, exactly. But she looked at me the way people do when they actually mean the invitation, not just the words. So I said yes. I drove over the bridge on a Saturday afternoon in June, wearing the one good jacket I owned and carrying the card I'd spent too long picking out. St. David's was a stone church with heavy wooden doors and a garden that had just come into bloom. The kind of place that looked like someone's grandmother had tended it for 40 years. I found a seat near the middle, beside a man I didn't know who turned out to be Josephine's second cousin from Moncton. The church filled up. String music started. Josephine's mother came down the aisle with her brother on one side and a tissue in her other hand, and then we waited. 5 minutes, 10. I watched the minister lean toward the altar boy and whisper something. I watched Josephine's maid of honor check her phone twice under the hem of her bouquet. The guests began to shift. The string music played through a second loop and then a third. At the 20-minute mark, Josephine appeared. She hadn't come down the aisle yet. She came out of a side door near the front. I found out later her father had gone looking for her, and she was standing at the front of the church with her wedding planner, a woman named Darlene, who was speaking very quietly to her. Josephine's face was blank in that particular way faces go blank when the mind can't catch up to what's happened. Her father, Edmund Garrett, was standing beside her. I'd never met Edmund, but I knew him the moment I saw him. Big man, quiet eyes, The kind of stillness that doesn't mean he isn't paying attention. He had one hand on Josephine's shoulder and his jaw was set hard. I later learned what had happened. Sebastian had sent a text to Darlene's work phone rather than Josephine's, either an accident or an act of cowardice, depending on your read of him. The message said he wasn't coming, that he needed to explain, but couldn't do it here, that he was sorry. I don't know what Darlene Dane told Josephine in those first moments. Whatever it was, Josephine walked out to the front of the church herself and stood in the spot where she was supposed to be married. The guests had mostly gone quiet. Some people were checking their phones. Two women near the back were whispering behind their programs and not being particularly subtle about it. Then one of them said, "Loud enough? She must have known he'd do this eventually." I don't know why that was the thing that moved me. Maybe it was because Josephine had planned every detail of this permit process so carefully. Maybe it was because she'd caught the ventilation error before I did. Maybe it was just that she was standing up there alone, and the only person who'd moved toward her was her father, and he could only do so much. I stood up. I heard the man next to me say something. I don't remember what, but I was already moving past him and down the aisle before the thought had finished forming. Josephine saw me when I was about halfway. Her expression shifted, not relief, not confusion exactly, more like she'd been holding her breath underwater and someone had opened a window somewhere far above. I stepped up beside her. The minister looked at me the way people look at someone who has walked onto a stage uninvited. "Who are you?" he asked. I said my name. I said I was a friend of Josephine's. Then I turned to her and spoke quietly enough that most of the room couldn't hear. "You don't have to stand here alone. If you want me to leave, I'll go. But I'm not going to sit back there and watch this happen to you." Josephine looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked out at the church, the rows of people she'd invited to witness something that had just disintegrated, and she looked back at me. "Why?" she asked. Just the one word. "Because you caught the ventilation error," I said, "and because nobody who puts that much care into something deserves to have it end like this." That was not the most romantic thing I've ever said. But it was true, and I think she needed something true more than something polished. Edmund Garrett took one step forward from his position near the wall. He looked at me, measuring, not hostile. "My daughter says yes," he said, "then that's enough for me." Josephine's hand found my arm. Her grip was cold. She looked at the minister. "I want to continue," she said. "Something. Anything." The minister was a practical man. He explained that without a valid marriage license in both parties' names, he couldn't perform a legal ceremony. But he could speak. He could offer a blessing. A commitment made in front of the people who mattered. The legalities could follow, if they chose. And so that's what happened. We stood at the front of that church while the minister spoke words he hadn't planned to say, and Josephine and I made simple, unrehearsed promises in front of 140 people. I said, "I don't know what comes next. But I promise I won't let you stand alone in this room. I promise to treat you with the same care you give to everything you touch." Josephine said, "I don't know what comes next either, but I know kindness when I see it, and I'm not going to walk away from it." When it was over, the church was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then Edmund started clapping. Then the second cousin from Moncton. Then most of the room. Not everyone. Some people sat on their hands. A woman near Sebastian's side of the church shook her head and gathered her coat. But most people clapped, and some of them were crying, and I stood there beside Josephine Garrett with no particular plan for what happened now. The reception was at a venue in Dartmouth her family had booked 6 months earlier. The sign still read Joe and Seb in script lettering. The centerpieces had white roses and navy ribbon. The DJ kept the music low until someone told him to turn it up. The seating chart, of course, was wrong. Josephine walked in on my arm. She had changed out of her veil somewhere between the church and the car. She kept her dress. She kept her flowers. She let go of my arm once to hug her mother, and her shoulders shook for about 30 seconds. When she pulled back, her mother looked over her shoulder at me. Not warm exactly, but not cold either. The look of a woman revising her assessment. I found a spot near the bar and stayed out of the way. Edmund found me within an hour. "You work for the city," he said. It wasn't a question. "Structural inspector," I said. He nodded. "What do you want from my daughter?" I thought about how to answer that. I remembered the last time someone had asked me a version of that question at a different kind of moment, and how I'd said the right things and not meant them as well as I'd thought. "I don't want anything from her," I said. "I couldn't sit there and watch." That's the honest version. Edmund was quiet for a moment. "She's been carrying this cafe project for 2 years," he said. "The money was split, but the work wasn't." "I know." I said. I reviewed her permit applications. She was thorough. He looked at me steadily. Then he said, "People who deserve good things don't always get them, but they deserve someone willing to show up. You showed up." He shook my hand and went back to his table. After the reception wound down, Josephine had nowhere to go. The apartment she'd shared with Sebastian on South Park Street was out. She'd told me that much on the ride over. Her parents' place was 40 minutes away, and full of relatives who had very strong opinions and not enough room. My apartment was on Roby Street, 12 minutes from the venue. It was not impressive, but it was quiet. "You can stay," I told her. "I'll take the couch." She looked at me. "That's twice you've done something I didn't ask for." "You can ask me to stop," I said. She didn't. My apartment was a second-floor unit in a building that had been renovated in the mid-90s and not meaningfully since. The hallway carpet was a pattern I couldn't explain. The kitchen light flickered when the fridge compressor kicked on. I had a fold-out couch with a metal bar that hit my lower back if I wasn't positioned right, and a bookshelf mostly full of building code references and 3 novels I'd been meaning to finish for 2 years. Josephine stood in the doorway and looked around slowly. "It feels lived in," she said. I didn't know why that felt like a compliment, but it did. I found her a clean set of clothes. I made tea, a habit left over from my mother who believed tea solved nothing but helped you sit still long enough to think. We ended up at my kitchen table at 11:30 at night. The city outside was doing its usual Saturday thing. I spoke first, because silence can calcify into something harder than it needs to be. "I need you to understand something," I said. "Today doesn't create an obligation. Not for you. You don't owe me anything." She looked at her cup. "People keep doing things for me today and telling me I don't owe them anything. Does it feel wrong?" She thought about it. "It feels strange. I'm more used to being the one who makes things work." "I know." She looked up. "Your ventilation specs," I said, "and the way you knew the bylaw binder better than I did after 3 visits. You don't let things fall through the cracks. You're not someone who waits for someone else to fix things. Then why did I let it get this far with Sebastian?" I didn't have an answer for that. I wasn't sure she wanted one. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "Not tonight, but in general." She was quiet long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "Finish the cafe. I want the cafe to be real, not as a project. As a place, is the money situation complicated?" "Yes." "Do you have a lawyer?" "Not yet." "You should get one," I said. "There are a few who specifically do business partnership dissolutions. I can ask around if you want." She looked at me for a moment. "You think practically occupational hazard." She smiled for the first time since the church. It was a small smile, but it was real. I told her about Meredith. Not everything, just the shape of it. 4 years, a quiet ending, the hollow that followed. How I'd gotten used to keeping things small so there was less to lose. How I'd been walking through my days as a person who mostly existed in the background. Josephine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That sounds lonely." "It was," I said. "I didn't realize how much until tonight." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Not a significant gesture, not the kind that needs anything attached to it. Just a hand. "I'm sorry about Meredith," she said. "I'm sorry about Sebastian." We looked at each other for a moment. "What were the options you were about to list?" she asked, "before you stopped." I'd been about to give her the 3 options speech. The one about how we could tell people it was just a gesture, or maintain appearances until things settled, or try something else. But sitting there at 11:30 in Halifax, with the kitchen light blinking, and my building code binders on the shelf, and Josephine Garrett in a wedding dress she was still wearing, because neither of us had thought to deal with that. Yet the third option seemed like the only honest one. "We could try to get to know each other," I said. "Not because of today, not out of gratitude or obligation, just because there might be something here worth finding out." She was quiet again. Outside, someone's car alarm went off and then stopped. "I don't know if I'm capable of trusting someone right now," she said. "You don't have to decide that tonight," I said. "Just sleep. Tomorrow everything will still be hard, but at least you'll have slept." She went to bed. I stretched out on the couch with the metal bar pressing against my spine and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I didn't regret walking down that aisle. I knew that clearly, lying there in the dark. Whatever came next, I'd done the right thing. I fell asleep with that thought, which was more than I'd had to go on in years. The weeks after the ceremony spread themselves out into something neither of us had a word for. The video from the church, filmed on someone's phone, had made the rounds on a couple of local Facebook groups before either of us knew it was out there. Someone posted it to a subreddit and it got traction. Strangers called me everything from a hero to a desperate opportunist, sometimes in the same comment thread. At work, my supervisor called me in on Monday. He was a decent man who did not enjoy situations he hadn't been briefed on. I told him my personal life was not going to affect my inspection reports, that I understood the optics were unusual, and that I was prepared to keep everything professional. He studied me for a moment and then said, "Just don't make me regret the trust I have in you." I told him I wouldn't. Josephine called a lawyer that week. The cafe's business structure had the finances so entangled with Sebastian's name that untangling it took patience and several phone calls. She handled all of it with the same methodical care I'd come to expect from her. She printed documents, color-coded folders, kept a running list of questions for each call. Watching her manage the worst outcome she'd ever been handed, I understood something I hadn't fully named before. She wasn't someone who needed rescuing. She was someone who'd had the rug pulled out from underneath her and was already assessing how to replace it. She stayed at my apartment for 2 weeks. The first few days were careful and functional. She slept in the bedroom. I was on the couch. We had breakfast at different times, more out of awkwardness than preference. Then she left a sticky note on the coffee maker that said, "I used the last of the coffee. Sorry." Replaced it. It's in the cupboard above the kettle. Something about that note loosened things between us. We started having meals together. Not every night, but most nights. She was a better cook than I was, which she pointed out with some frequency, and I didn't argue. I made the tea. I stopped apologizing for the apartment. She stopped treating it like a temporary arrangement. One evening, she spread her cafe drawings across my kitchen table, floor plan, furniture layout, lighting scheme, and walked me through everything. I'd only seen the structural side of it through the permit application. Seeing it like this, through her eyes, was different. "This is good," I said. "You say that like you're surprised." "I'm not surprised," I said. "I'm just." "It's really good, Josephine." She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked back at the drawings. "Sebastian used to say the look was my department because the business side was over my head," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away. I pulled out the chair next to her and sat down. "The only reason that could possibly be true," I said, "is if the person saying it needed you to believe it." She was quiet for a long time after that. I started learning the smaller things about her. She took her coffee black but her tea with 1 spoon of honey. She woke up before 6 every morning regardless of what time she'd gone to sleep. She kept a running list in a notebook, not on her phone, an actual paper notebook, of things she wanted to remember. She was the kind of person who noticed when someone was struggling before they said anything, and she did something about it without making it a moment. One morning I came in from a site visit that had gone badly. A foundation issue that was going to cost a family their renovation timeline and about $40,000 in unexpected work. And I sat down at my kitchen table without saying anything. She put a cup of tea in front of me without asking. Then she sat down across from me and just waited. "Bad day," I finally said. "I know," she said. "I could tell when you came through the door." Nobody had said that to me in a long time, that someone could tell. 3 months after the church, Josephine moved into a short-term furnished rental a few streets over while the legal situation with the cafe sorted itself out. She wasn't far. We had dinner most Wednesdays and some weekends. We went to the Halifax Farmers Market on a Saturday in September and walked around for 2 hours looking at things neither of us needed to buy. I carried her bag. She talked to every vendor. It felt ordinary in a way I hadn't felt in years. Her parents invited me to dinner in October. Edmund and Rosalind Garrett lived in a 2-story house in Dartmouth, with a side garden that Rosalind tended with serious commitment and a kitchen that smelled like something had been simmering since mid-morning. Their home was warm and modest and full of photographs. Dinner was lamb stew and biscuits. Edmund poured the wine. Rosalind kept the conversation moving through safe things until the stew was done and the plates were cleared. Then Edmund set down his glass and looked at me. "Tell me something," he said. "When you walked down that aisle in June, what was actually in your head?" I looked at Josephine. She gave me nothing, which I appreciated. She wasn't going to carry the answer for me. "She was standing alone," I said. "People were recording. Someone said something unkind, and I knew her. Not well, but enough to know she didn't deserve what was happening. I didn't have a plan. I just couldn't stay in my seat." Edmund nodded slowly. "You didn't think about how it would look?" "Not until I was already up there." Rosalind set her hands flat on the table and looked at me directly. "She's not fragile," she said. "She's never been fragile. But she trusted someone for a long time who used that against her." "I know," I said. "I don't want to be someone she has to be careful around. I want to be someone she doesn't have to manage. The table was quiet. Then, Edmund said, when I was watching my daughter stand at the front of that church, there were a lot of people in that room. Most of them were sorry for her. A few of them were entertained. One person stood up. He paused. I'm not saying that makes you someone I trust completely yet, but it makes you someone I'm willing to know. Rosalind put more biscuits on the table and changed the subject to the garden, and I understood the most important part of the evening was over. On the drive back to the city, Josephine was quiet for a while. Then she said, "My mother doesn't give people second chances." She gave me one? She put more biscuits out, she said. That's basically a standing ovation from Rosalind Garrett. I laughed. She laughed. We drove over the McDonald Bridge in the dark with the harbor lights below us, and it felt like something had settled. She reached over and put her hand on mine on the gear shift. When I pulled up in front of her building, she didn't get out right away. She sat there for a moment. "Patrick," she said. "Yeah, I want to try. Not the arrangement, not the story. Us." I looked at her. "I want that too," I said. "Then let's do it properly." She smiled. "Take me to dinner, an actual dinner. Pick me up at 7. You're in a car with me right now. That doesn't count. That was a drive." I shook my head. "Saturday at 7. She got out of the car, took 2 steps toward the door, then turned back. "One more thing," she said. "In that church, you said it was because I caught the ventilation error." I did say that. Was that actually the reason? I thought about it. It was the honest version of a longer reason, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said goodnight and went inside. I drove home on empty streets and didn't turn the radio on. Things between us grew steadily from there. Not dramatically. Not with the kind of momentum that makes good social media content. Just quietly and honestly, the way things grow when they're not being performed for anyone. Sebastian came back in November. He showed up at the permit office on a Tuesday afternoon. I saw him through the glass partition before he saw me, and I took a breath. He looked the same. The coat, the posture, the particular confidence of someone who is used to rooms rearranging themselves around him. He told the receptionist he was there to see Josephine. The receptionist told him Josephine didn't work here. He blinked, looked around, and found me. "Right," he said. I came out from behind the partition. "This is a city office," I said. "Do you have a permit application?" "I want to speak with Josephine. She's not here." He looked at me the way men like Sebastian look at men like me. A quick appraisal, a quiet dismissal, the slightly amused expression of someone who doesn't take the obstacles seriously. "She's still going through with the cafe," he said. "Did you know that? She's using a business lawyer to cut me out of my own venture. Her lawyer would tell you it's a question of what work was actually done," I said. "But I'm not a lawyer." "You're in over your head," he said. "Both of you. This whole thing started because she was humiliated, and you wanted to be her hero for 15 minutes. That's not a relationship. That's a coping mechanism." I didn't answer. "She'll come back to the person she actually chose," he said. "When the novelty of this wears off, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," I said. "If you want to contest the cafe partnership legally, you have her lawyer's contact information. Don't come back here." He left. I went back to my desk, and I sat there for a moment before I could focus on anything. That evening, I told Josephine what had happened. I didn't soften it. I told her exactly what he'd said. She was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "Do you believe him? That it's a coping mechanism?" "I believe that he wants you to believe it," I said. "That's different." She thought about that. "He's going to go to people who know us," she said. "He's going to tell his version." "None?" "Probably." "It bothers me," I said, "but not more than you do." "In a good way." She looked up at me. "Josephine," I said. "I walked down that aisle because I couldn't sit still. I stayed because I wanted to. Those are 2 separate decisions, and only one of them matters now." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He told his friends I manipulated you into it, that I'd set it up. Someone mentioned it to my mother." "What did your mother say?" Josephine looked at me with something close to pride. "She said anyone who'd met me for 10 minutes would know I don't manipulate people. I just expect them to do what they say they're going to do." Sebastian didn't disappear quietly. He mentioned the situation to a few mutual friends. He posted something vague on Instagram that was obviously about Josephine. He contacted one of the vendors who'd been planning to supply the cafe and suggested she was unstable. The vendor called Josephine to tell her. That was not the outcome Sebastian had intended. Josephine was shaken for about a week. I found her sitting at her kitchen table one evening, reading something on her laptop with her jaw tight and her shoulders drawn in. "What does it actually say?" I asked. She turned the laptop toward me. It was a comment thread. Someone had shared the church video again, and the discussion underneath had turned unkind. People speculating, people assigning motives, a few accounts that felt like they'd been created recently with nothing else in their history. Close it, I said. It's going to keep going. Maybe. But you can't read your way out of it. She closed the laptop. Tell me what you want, I said. Not what you want to do about the comments, what you actually want. She thought about it. I want the cafe to open, she said. I want it to be a place where people come in and feel like they've been somewhere. I want to stop defending why I'm with you to people who have never spoken to either of us. She paused. And I want to stop feeling like I'm waiting for you to realize this is too complicated. I pulled my chair over until I was sitting next to her. I work in structural inspections, I said. I spend most of my professional life evaluating things that look sound to find out whether they're actually load-bearing. I looked at her. You're load-bearing, Josephine. You have been, since the ventilation spec. She stared at me. Was that too much? I asked. She laughed. A real one, sudden and full. The first real laugh I'd heard from her in about 10 days. That was the most structurally romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, she said. We stayed like that for a while. Eventually she made tea, and I found something bad on television, and we sat on her couch with the lamp on and let the evening do what evenings do. The following week, Josephine posted a short statement on her public social media accounts. She wrote that the cafe she'd been building was moving forward, that the business partnership had ended and that was a private matter, and that her personal life was hers to live. She didn't mention Sebastian by name. She didn't explain the church. She just said she was grateful for people who'd shown genuine kindness, that she was building something she believed in, and she was looking forward to what came next. Her final line was, "The person who left doesn't get to narrate what comes after." Her mother shared it. Edmund shared it. About 300 people liked it within the first hour. Sebastian tried once more, a phone call to Josephine's mobile about 2 weeks after that. She took the call in the next room. I heard her voice, calm and brief. She came back in about 4 minutes. What did he want? I asked. To explain himself, and I told him I understood exactly what he'd done and why, and that I was done organizing my life around his version of events. She sat down. He's not a bad person, she said after a pause. He's just someone who needed everything to be about his trajectory. I spent 4 years trying to fit into that trajectory. You fit better somewhere else, I said. She looked at me. Yes, she said, I do. The cafe opened the following spring. It was on Barrington Street, as she'd always planned, in a narrow building with exposed brick and big windows and a tile floor she'd sourced herself from a shop in Lunenburg. She called it Groundwork. The name was hers. And when she told me the reason, because everything worth building starts below the surface, I understood it immediately. I was there for the soft opening on a Thursday evening in April. Edmund and Rosalind came. Her brother drove from Fredericton. The contractor who'd done the reno showed up with his wife. The permit was framed near the entrance, which was either a joke aimed at me or genuine sentiment, and I chose to believe both. The city reviewed it the following month. A feature ran in a local magazine. The paragraph about the cafe's origins described Josephine as someone who had rebuilt from an unexpected setback and created something genuinely her own. She'd written out how she wanted it described, and no one had changed a word. One evening in June, a year almost to the day after the church, she handed me a cup of tea at Groundwork after the last customer had gone. The lights over the counter were still on. The chairs were up on the tables except for the 2 we were sitting at. She said, I want to get married again. I set my cup down. We're already married, I said, not arguing, just noting. The first time was about surviving the day, she said. I want to do it again because I'm choosing to. Not in front of people who came to watch something fall apart. She looked at me. In front of the people who were there when we put it back together? Is that a proposal? I asked. She smiled. It's a statement of intent, she said. Take it or leave it. I'll take it, I said. The second wedding was in her parents' backyard in Dartmouth on a Saturday in late August. 38 people. Rosalind's garden had peaked perfectly, which she noted she'd planned for, and I believed her. Edmund walked Josephine across the lawn to where I was standing in the same jacket from the first ceremony, which I'd had cleaned and properly pressed this time. He shook my hand before he stepped back. You've been steady, he said. It was the highest compliment I'd ever received from him. I intend to keep being, I said. The vows were our own. I went first. The first time I stood up for you, I didn't have words for why. I only knew you shouldn't have to stand alone. Today, I have the words. I choose you because of who you are when no one is watching. Because you catch the thing everyone else misses. Because you know when someone needs tea and you don't make a production of it. I choose you because ordinary days with you are better than any version of extraordinary I ever imagined for myself. Josephine steadied her breath. The first time I said yes to you, I needed the ground to stop moving. Today, the ground is solid. I say yes because you showed me what it looks like when someone chooses you without needing anything back. I say yes because you are consistent and careful and you think load-bearing walls are a metaphor. And you're not wrong. I love you, Patrick. I choose this. Rosalind was crying before the minister reached the end of the blessing. Edmund was not crying, but his jaw was doing the thing it did when he was working hard not to. We danced in the backyard under lights. Josephine had strung herself between two birch trees. We ate the food. We said goodbye to people slowly, in the way of people who are in no particular hurry. She fell asleep in the car on the way home, her head against the window, the garden flowers still in her hair. I didn't wake her. I just drove. 2 years later, Josephine got the call that Groundwork had been nominated for a design award from a national trade publication. She was in the back office doing payroll when it came through, and she walked out to the front counter and handed me the phone with an expression I'd never quite seen on her before. Not pride exactly, more like the feeling of something landing where you always knew it should. We had a daughter the following spring. We named her Hazel, after Rosalind's mother, who'd come to Josephine in a story about a woman who'd built things with her hands and raised people who weren't afraid of work. Edmund cried when we told him the name. He tried not to. He failed. I still work for the city. I still check load-bearing walls. I still eat lunch in my truck more days than not. Josephine runs Groundwork and is now consulting on 2 other restaurant projects in the HRM. Hazel is 2.5 years old and very interested in the permit binder I keep on the bottom shelf, which Josephine says is genetic. About a year after Hazel was born, Sebastian sent an email. He said he knew he didn't have the right to reach out, that he'd thought about what he'd done a great deal, and that he was sorry. Not the broad, general kind of sorry that doesn't cost anything. He named specific things. He said he knew who Josephine was and had spent 4 years making her smaller. He said he hoped she was well. I read it over her shoulder. I asked how she felt. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, I forgave him a while ago. Not for him, just because I needed that space back. The space you were using to be angry. The space I was using to wonder if I'd missed something, if I'd caused it somehow. She looked at the email. I didn't cause it. I just trusted too long. She closed the laptop. That evening we made dinner while Hazel sat in her chair, pulling pieces of bread apart, deeply satisfied with the work. The kitchen was warm. The window was fogged from the pot on the stove. Josephine stood at the counter chopping and talking about a permit issue one of her consulting clients was having, and I stood beside her listening, and I thought about the February morning a few years back when she'd come into my office with a color-coded permit application and caught an error I hadn't got to yet. All of it led here. The ventilation specs and the tea and the phone call at 2 a.m., that never came, because we built the kind of life where the foundation was inspected properly from the start. If you had told me on the morning of June 14th that I would stand up from my seat in the middle of St. David's Church and walk down an aisle in front of 140 people to stand beside a woman I barely knew, I would have told you that wasn't something a person like me does. But I did it. And the thing nobody tells you about standing up in a moment like that is that the standing up is the easy part. The real choice comes in the days after, when the moment is gone and what's left is just a regular life that needs tending. I chose to tend it. Every morning I got up and chose it again, not because of a single afternoon in a stone church, but because Josephine Garrett was worth the choosing. She still is.